Hi, this is Mike Breininger, pastor of New House Richland, formerly Richland Center Fellowship. I'm coming to you today with a bit of light. At least that's what we're calling the series. Today I want to talk about the new house, which is the house that the Lord is raising up in these times. It's a new expression of the church. I want to talk specifically about one of the pillars of the new house, which is called truth, the pillar of truth. There's a passage in John chapter 18, verse 37, where Jesus is before Pontius Pilate in the trial that Pilate had him go through before Jesus was condemned and executed. Pilate was asking him questions about who he was. One of the questions was, "Are you a king?" Because that's what the religious leaders were accusing him of. And Jesus said, "You're right in saying that I am a king." And then in verse 37, it says, "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." So Pilate wanted to make a big deal out of Jesus being a king. Jesus, of course, has always been the king. Jesus made the big deal about the fact that he was coming to the earth to testify to the truth. Now, this has amazing implications for people. It means that if Jesus was speaking truthfully, he came to reveal truth to people and anyone who's a follower of Jesus, people that call themselves Christians, follower of Christ. The basis of what we believe in our following of Jesus is truth. Now, I know I've heard a lot of people say, well, it's faith, you just believe blindly or believe whatever you want to believe. But in actuality, the basis of what we believe is truth. That's what Jesus brought to the earth, was truth. It's the pillar in the new house. Okay, so what is truth? I've wrestled with different definitions of truth. What is that? I've come up with this brief definition. Truth is God's view of reality. So if you think about this, most of what we do in the realm of science and education has to do with what we can observe of the material or created world. I call that observable truth. In other words, things that we discover. And of course, the more we discover, it changes what observable truth is. It doesn't stay the same because the more we observe, the more we understand, right? And we have, if you think about all the truth that's out there in the world, all the things, the knowledge that could ever be gained, all the created world, the entire universe, what percentage does humanity have of that knowledge? Well, it has to be less than 1%. So if we frame our lives and our thinking based on observable knowledge alone, we are going to be woefully lacking in our understanding of truth. In other words, we don't have God's perspective. There's another form of truth besides observable truth. In other words, what we see, feel, experience, and understand. There's something called revealed truth. In other words, that's the truth that God gives us, and it brings context to all of life. In fact, it should bring context to observable truth. So what God says is true and real. It's in the Bible. Now, there's lots of evidence for that truth to be really the truth. In fact, I teach a whole class on this called Apologetics, Critical Thinking, and Worldview. In that, there are so many points that verify what the Bible says is first inspired by God, not from humans. And second, it is truth. It is the way it is. I'm just going to give one example, right? There are 332 prophecies in the Old Testament that make some kind of reference to the coming of the Messiah, the Christ, the Savior. In other words, it talks about his birth, where he'll be born, that he'll be born of a virgin, how he'll grow up, what he will do after he grows up, how he will die, how he will be raised from the dead. All of those things were told about hundreds or even thousands of years before Jesus came. 332 prophecies. Okay, that is it. The folks who are involved in mathematical probabilities, which is not my area, but I've read these. The mathematical probabilities are so unlikely for this to have happened by chance that the entire universe couldn't contain the likelihood of this happening in one person, who is Jesus. And of course, we know that Jesus fulfilled all 332 of those prophecies. That's just one expression of understanding that God has revealed to us his truth, first and foremost in the Bible, but he also speaks to individuals about his truth. So truth is such an important part of people's understanding of who they are, their identity, of their destiny, of the world around them, and what they should believe. Many people have believed in observable knowledge, but not revealed knowledge. And so they haven't found the truth. There's a passage in 1 Timothy 4:1. It says, the Spirit clearly says that in later times, some will abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. Wow. In other words, there's going to be deception. People will believe things that are not truth. We should really take note of that, because I think there's a lot of that going on today. There has been in recent history. I'll mention a few things that people can easily identify with. You know, there was Nazism, the rise of the Aryan race, the dominance of the Germanic people on earth that was supposed to be a destiny for them. That really was the foundation of World War II. That was a deception. It was a lie. Now, today, most people believe it as and see it as a lie. Back then in the 1930s and 40s, they didn't see that. In fact, the German people especially, but many other people believed that it was true. How could that happen? Well, if we don't have the foundational structure of the revealed truth of God, it's easy to believe almost anything. In fact, there's a phenomenon that's talked about now in psychology. It's called mass formation psychosis. It means large numbers of people believe things, and it's not true, but they continue to believe those things. And there's an effort by those who believe them to make them more believable. So they come up with all kinds of reasons why they should continue to believe the things, even though they're demonstrably not true. One of those is socialism. It's been experimented with many times on the earth, failed every time. Here we are in the United States of America and many other countries on the earth that are struggling with trying to bring a socialist utopia into existence. Of course, that will never happen, because the basis of socialism is that government takes the resources that are in the hands of the people and redistributes it to other people. Like I said, it's failed in every case, but there are still people who strongly believe this. Some are in our government, some are in other spheres of society. They strongly believe this. And there are political candidates who actually run on the platform of socialism. Now, they may call it democratic socialism or some other reference to it, but it's still socialism. It's taking what belongs to people, giving it to the government, and then redistributing it as the government sees fit. I think a lot of what we've seen in the last few years, whether it's the pandemic, the massive violence that was taking place in the streets, riots, sometimes we're called demonstrations, but I mean, they're burning buildings, destroying cars, people being killed. There were clearly riots that were going on in the streets. And there were lots of people that were making arguments to support these things because they did not know or believe the truth. In fact, it tells us in 2 Thessalonians 2:9-11 that those who decide to refuse to believe the truth, it says those words. They refuse to believe the truth. They are deceived, and God actually allows a powerful delusion to come to them. In other words, they continue to be deceived. They're part of this mass formation psychosis, or it's just a deception is another term for that. They continue to think wrongly, believe wrongly, and participate in that and build about structures that help them continue to believe that way. So we live in a time when lawlessness and deception have taken a new place in society. This is a destructive path for humanity, and it will not end well. What's the solution to this? If we look at things that are going wrong, we might say, well, isn't there a better way? Isn't there a different way? And the answer to that is clear. Yes, it's called truth. I can tell you, if we would teach the Bible to people, teach it in the schools, and I know people are thinking, oh my goodness, that's against the law. Well, it's not against the law. But if we taught the Bible to people in schools, but if you didn't do it there, do it at home, do it at church, do it everywhere else, because you may think, well, we're trying to indoctrinate them. Well, in many ways, that's exactly what it is. We're indoctrinating them with truth. There's a term called brainwashing, and that's just getting people to believe something that isn't true. That's back to that deception or mass formation psychosis. I'm convinced that even today, what we're seeing with a lot of the social reconstruction or deconstruction, hatred for the police, they've been killed or being killed, slaughtered, consistently innocent people on the streets being shot. We live in a time of lawlessness in America, at least, as we've never seen before. It may not be that way all over the earth, and I'm not claiming that it is, but I'm saying in the United States of America, one of the pictures that go around on social media, and many of them, are people walking into stores, loading up their arms with items and just walking out the stores. Nobody stops them, nobody arrests them. I mean, this is a form of lawlessness. And unless our social fabric turns back toward truth based on the revealed knowledge of God contained in the Bible, we are on a slippery slope downward. It is my belief and understanding that God is raising up the new house of the Lord, an expression of the church that will restore the truth and wisdom of God, not only in the church, but in our social fabric. It's not about the church taking anything over, so don't get that idea. It's about the truth of God being revealed in every sphere of society. As long as we live in a free country, we can choose to accept the truth or reject it. People have that right. But seeing the good benefit, what happens when we believe what God says, when we learn to relate to God in a way that He has framed for us, and to one another in that way, life will be so much healthier, our social fabric so much stronger, families will thrive. I look forward to the restoration, maybe the full restoration of truth in our churches and in our culture. It is a pillar of the new house of God. God bless you. I will be back next week with another bit of light.